Hi everyone. In this video, we'll provide an introduction to the philosophy of Spinoza, one of the most original thinkers in the history of philosophy. We'll explore Spinoza's ideas along with the general characteristics of modern philosophy during his lifetime. Baruch Spinoza was born in Amsterdam in 1632. His family were Portuguese or Spanish Jews who had immigrated to the Netherlands to escape Christian persecution. His father wanted Spinoza to become a rabbi. That's why Spinoza received his first education at the Amsterdam synagogue, which was religious in nature. He later took lessons from Franciscus van den Enden and learned natural sciences, mathematics, philosophy and Latin. During this period, he began to be ostracized by the Amsterdam Jewish community for his inquisitive and critical thoughts. His former teachers found Spinoza's ideas dangerous. They offered him money to give up his ideas, or at least not to express them openly. However, Spinoza stood by his ideas and was excommunicated at the age of 23. His place in society was getting worse. After being attacked, probably by a fanatic, he left Amsterdam, ostracized not only from his religion but also from social life. After this incident, Spinoza, who began to use the name Benedict, spent the rest of his life in the quiet regions of the Netherlands. He refused his friends' offers of financial assistance and teaching positions from some universities. Spinoza, who preferred a quiet and peaceful life, earned his living by making lenses and giving private lessons. He died of lung disease in 1677 at the age of 45. Spinoza is one of the most important and original philosophers in the history of philosophy. His philosophy is a very consistent system in itself. He proposed new solutions to philosophical problems he took from the history of philosophy, especially from Descartes. Spinoza's philosophy deals with many subjects, but his entire system is based on the answers he gives to the questions what is being and what exists. Based on these answers, he reaches conclusions about humans and human life. Therefore, his philosophy can be seen as a structure that brings together the philosophy of existence, the philosophy of knowledge, and ethics. The main purpose of Spinoza's philosophy is human happiness. He tried to find out how we should live to achieve the highest happiness and devoted all his philosophical efforts to this goal. Spinoza thought that when we understand true philosophy, we will also know how to live. To achieve this goal, he argued that we need to fully understand humans, nature, and the place of humans in nature. Therefore, nature, in which humans also live, is one of the most fundamental elements of Spinoza's philosophy. Spinoza's methodology. In the modern age, the rapid development and progress of mathematics-based science played a major role in the emergence and development of Descartes' understanding of method and philosophy. Like his contemporary philosophers, Spinoza closely followed these scientific developments and was influenced by Descartes' philosophy and understanding of method. He even wrote a book called Principles of Cartesian Philosophy, in which he dealt with Descartes' philosophy and explained the principles of this philosophy mathematically. In this respect, Spinoza, like Descartes, placed mathematics at the center of his philosophy and philosophical method. He meticulously applied the methods of analysis, synthesis, and deduction used by mathematicians and geometers in constructing his philosophy. The work in which Spinoza presents his philosophy in the most comprehensive and systematic way is Ethics. In this book, Spinoza explained the problems he dealt with using the method Euclid used to deal with geometric shapes in his book Elements. In other words, he first defined the concepts he would deal with and put forward his axioms, then presented his propositions based on these definitions and axioms, and proved these propositions one by one. Therefore, this method used by Spinoza is called the axiomatic method or geometric method in the history of philosophy. However, Spinoza did not see mathematics merely as a tool with which he could explain his philosophy. According to him, the order of nature is the same as the order of mathematics. In other words, just as the objects of mathematics, that is, numbers, geometric shapes, have certain properties and there are necessary connections between these objects, the same applies to things that exist in nature. so the method to be used to understand nature must be the same. Spinoza says, "For nature is always the same. Its effect and power are the same everywhere." That is, the laws and rules of nature that explain how everything happens and how it passes from one form to another are the same everywhere and at all times. Therefore, the method to be used to understand the nature of things must also be the same. Therefore, Spinoza, who sees nature as the most fundamental element of his philosophy, followed the mathematical order, which he sees as the order of nature, in constructing his philosophy. In this sense, it can be said that Spinoza shared the view expressed by Galileo's words, "The book of nature is written in the language of mathematics." Spinoza's metaphysics. Spinoza, like some of his contemporaries, based his understanding of nature on the concept of substance. For Spinoza, just like for Descartes, substance means something that does not need anything other than itself to exist. However, Spinoza rejects the idea that there is more than one substance, unlike Descartes. According to Spinoza, by definition, substance must be the cause of itself. Otherwise, it would depend on a cause other than itself and cease to be a substance. Also, the substance must be infinite. If it were finite, it would be related to other substances that would limit it and make it dependent on them. Besides, there must be only one substance. If there were more than one substance, they would limit each other and again cease to be substances. Therefore, according to Spinoza, there is only one substance that is not dependent on anything and on which everything else depends, and this substance is God. God is the necessarily existing, eternal, that is, absolutely infinite and unique substance. Therefore, according to Spinoza, it is wrong to call things that do not exist on their own and are dependent on something other than themselves substances, because no other substance than God can exist or be conceived. The concepts of mind and body, which Descartes thought were substances, and the properties of thinking and occupying space associated with them, can only be essential attributes of substance. Spinoza, starting from the idea that there is no other substance in nature than God, identified God with nature. In other words, what Spinoza means by God is the same as what he means by nature. God is nature, nature is God, and therefore everything in nature is in God. Spinoza used the concept of Deus sive natura, which means God or nature, to express this thought. Also, according to Spinoza, God is the cause of everything in nature. In other words, since Spinoza considers God and nature to be identical, God is the absolute cause of things that originate from him and are a result of him, that is, everything. Since God exists, necessarily everything that exists and happens in nature is subject to this necessity and is within this necessary cause and effect relationship. This cause and effect relationship is a relationship of entailment in the context of necessity. In other words, the existence of causes necessarily requires the existence of their consequences, just as the concept of a triangle requires that the sum of its interior angles be 180 degrees. Spinoza considered everything that happens in nature and every relationship between things within a chain of cause and effect relationships centered on God. So it can be said that Spinoza's understanding of causality is directly related to the idea of necessity. So much so that if there is a cause, it is necessary for this cause to have a consequence, and vice versa. In other words, if there is a certain cause, this cause requires a certain consequence. And conversely, if there is a certain consequence, this consequence must have been necessitated by a certain cause. Where there is no cause, it is not possible for there to be a consequence. This necessary cause and effect relationship that Spinoza thinks exists in nature is expressed by the concept of determinism. The conclusion Spinoza draws from this deterministic understanding is this: something that is determined by God to create a consequence cannot make itself undetermined. Since the reason for the existence of things is God, everything that exists and happens is necessarily so because God caused, required, or determined it to be so. Something that is determined to create a consequence is necessarily so determined by God, and something that is not determined by God to create a consequence cannot determine itself. Therefore, Spinoza argues that there can be no freedom or possibility for anything in nature. In other words, nothing is possible or free in the sense of not being necessary, not being determined, or being random. Everything is determined by the necessity of the divine nature to exist in a certain way and to create a consequence. According to Spinoza, our thinking that something is possible or free stems from our not knowing the cause of its existence or actions. In this sense, to say that a person does something with his free will is as meaningless as saying that a stone rolls with its free will or that the wind blows with its free will. Therefore, according to Spinoza, since only that which exists and acts solely by the necessity of its own nature can be called free, only God is free. Other things are determined to be what they are by their own causes. However, it seems that Spinoza does not use the concept of freedom in its conventional sense, or in the senses used by his contemporaries. So much so that freedom is not an absolute freedom of will and action, but the existence and action of something with the absolute necessity of its own nature. In this sense, God also acts not by his desires, choices, or free will, but by the necessity of his own nature. In other words, God acts not because he wants to or prefers to, but because of his own nature. Just as the sum of the interior angles of a triangle, being 180 degrees, is not up to the will or preference of the triangle, therefore God is free only in this sense, because God acts only according to the laws of his own nature and cannot be forced by anyone.